You're listening to an exclusive episode of the NK News podcast, available only to subscribers. You can listen to this and other episodes from your preferred podcast player by accessing the private podcast feed. For more detailed instructions, please see the step-by-step guide on the NK News website at nknews.org/private-feed. Hello listeners and welcome to the NK News podcast. I'm your host, Jacko Zwetsuit, and today we're recording this in the NK News studio. It is Monday, the 21st of April, 2025. I'm joined here in the studio by a first-time guest, Dr. Bruce Bennett, and he is a senior international defense researcher at the RAND Corporation and a specialist in Northeast Asian security, military strategy, and asymmetric threats, particularly weapons of mass destruction. He's conducted extensive research on deterrence, Korean Peninsula conflict scenarios, and regime collapse planning for North Korea. And we're going to talk through some of those issues here today. So welcome on the show, Dr. Bruce Bennett.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
So let's start, I guess, with the alliance, the state of the alliance. We'll start with a simple question, something that's often said but not often enough interrogated. How ironclad is the U.S. ROC alliance today? Do you see any cracks forming, whether strategic, political, or perceptual?
There are always cracks in any alliance. I mean, that's a fact of life. Are there potentials for disagreements between the U.S. and South Korea? Of course, our interests are different. They're not always the same. Now, in many places, they are the same, which is what facilitates an alliance. But we do have some differences in interest, and there are different political parties in South Korea who have different interests.
But those things have always been true for the last 80 years.
They have always been true. We seem to be at a place, though, where they're more true than they've been in the past, in both the U.S. and in South Korea. So we just have to wait and see what happens as we go forward in the next little while.
Okay. Do you expect anything major, dramatic to happen?
Well, I think that one of the most dramatic things will come with the U.S. South Korea negotiations on tariffs and that sort of thing. And there, I think it's extraordinarily unfortunate that you have not had a coherent South Korean government that could attempt to preempt those negotiations. You know, there are many things that the South Korean government could have done to tone down those negotiations. But it didn't happen because you didn't have a coherent government to really do it. So that's unfortunate.
Is it a natural given that military issues would be drawn into a negotiation on trade and tariffs?
Given the nature of the alliance, probably yes. It's a matter of, you go back to the administration of Park Geun-hye.
Mm-hmm.
She promised that South Korea would provide a defense budget of 3% of GDP. You have never gotten close to that. Well, that's a huge issue for this administration in the U.S. about allies not bearing their fair share. So that's an issue which you could have addressed in January or February and taken some action to try and balance that out. Didn't happen, and that's almost necessarily going to thrust it into the economic discussions.
Do you happen to know off the top of your head what the percentage of the South Korean GDP is that's currently spent on defense?
About 2.5%. It's been pretty constant for the last, 8 or 10 years.
Okay, so that's more than a lot of NATO partners.
Yeah. It's more than NATO partners, but it isn't close to what Korea promised.
Which is 3%.
3%.
So we're really just haggling over 0.5%.
Oh, okay, so 0.5% is what? It's about 10 trillion won.
Okay.
It's a trivial amount of money, right?
And in terms of the overall size of the Korean economy, yeah, it's not massive. Now, is there any serious discussion in Washington about downsizing the U.S. commitment to Korea?
There are all kinds of discussions going on in Washington, but most of the discussions have been focused on Europe and then a little bit on the Middle East, on the Gaza situation and so forth. Not so far a lot on Korea. You know, we've had the discussions with the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, Bridge Colby, when he testified to Congress and said that the U.S. should be paying more attention to China than to the North Korean threat.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I hate to say it, but where's the best place to position U.S. forces to deal with China? Where in the area can they be closer to China than in Korea? So to talk about them focus more on China, that's an anomaly in the U.S. system. U.S. Forces Korea has almost always been prohibited from dealing with China. That's an issue controlled by the U.S. Pacific Command. And so they haven't worked on it. That's going to change, I think, pretty clearly in this administration. But it doesn't mean that that's going to hurt Korea. That could still be the very best place to put U.S. forces to be near to China and to be able to deal with it. Now, it's not the nearest to Taiwan, but you don't put everything in one basket. You want to spread them out around the periphery of China.
But wouldn't that automatically draw South Korea into any conflict with between the U.S. and China?
Well, so let's go back to 2016.
Okay.
U.S. is putting THAAD into Korea.
Yes.
What does China say? China says, oh, those weapons, they're terrible. They could intercept anything we fire at Japan or anything we fire at the U.S. No. THAAD doesn't reach high enough to reach missiles going from China to Japan.
But the radar, the X radar, is that what I'm talking about? That reaches into northern China.
The over-the-horizon radar can see, but China's got 2 over-the-horizon radars pointed at the Korean Peninsula. So come on, China, that's not the reason. The only missiles that the THAAD can defend against where it's positioned in South Korea are Chinese missiles fired at South Korea.
Right. Okay. But if the U.S. Pacific Command changes the rules of engagement to allow U.S. troops stationed in Korea to engage with China in case of any contingency, wouldn't that automatically make Korea a target for China?
Oh, I think you've got to assume that Korea is automatically a target for China regardless. You got F-35 aircraft here that are Korean aircraft. You've got all kinds of resources here that are not just purely U.S. And China's going to be very concerned about it. So, yes, would China be more concerned if the U.S. keeps building up capabilities here in Korea? Certainly they would. That's only natural to expect that. But South Korea is not off the hot seat. No matter what, as long as there are even no forces, U.S. forces in Korea, Korea's still a target because it's got substantial military capability, and China is going to want to dominate.
What's your sense of how Seoul is reading the alliance with the U.S. these days? Is confidence holding, or do you detect growing anxiety under the surface?
Oh, I think there's considerable anxiety growing under the surface.
Is that bipartisan in Korea?
Oh, yeah, yes. So go back even before the election in November, in the U.S. election in November. You know, when I was here last year before the election, everybody was concerned about what happens if Trump gets elected. Didn't matter whether they were conservatives or progressives. It was a concern because they just weren't sure how to read him and what he would do, how he would try to work with North Korea. Now, Kim Jong-un's been really good to South Korea and the U.S. because it's made it very clear that he really isn't going to work with the U.S. except under some very restrictive conditions. So in some senses, situation's actually better now than it was before the election because there's less uncertainty. Kim isn't just going to wake up some morning and say, sure, let's go do a negotiation. Remember how badly he was hurt in 2019 by the failed Hanoi summit. I mean, he purged lots of people, hurt lots of people in North Korea. He's not going to negotiate again with Donald Trump and let Donald Trump embarrass him in front of his elites, especially given the level of instability in North Korea.
What's your sense of that percentage of progressive politicians in South Korea who would welcome the end of the U.S.-Korea alliance and the disappearance of USFK forces from Korea?
Oh, I think even your leadership, Lee Jae-myung, he doesn't want to see the alliance ended.
No, he doesn't. Yeah.
Are there some in the Progressive Party who would? Sure. There are always more extreme people in any party.
But would that be larger than 10%, do you think?
Probably not much, but, ballpark probably there. I mean, I'm not a I'm not a pollster with to measure the progressives, but I think people generally realize. I mean, you look at the opinion polls that have been made. Over 90% of South Koreans say that they want the U.S. ROK alliance to continue. Mm-hmm. So it's not going to be much more than 10% if it's even that much.
Now, it's been said that alliances are built not just on capabilities, but on shared perceptions. Do you see a divergence today between how Washington and Seoul perceive the North Korean threat? Curious to hear the rest? Become an NK News subscriber today for access to the full episode. Head to nknews.org/join for more information. If you're already a subscriber to NK News, you can listen to full episodes from your preferred podcast player by accessing the private podcast feed. For more detailed instructions, please see the step-by-step guide on the NK News website at nknews.org/private-feed.